There's a lot of motion across the ocean. Sorry, that was super cheesy, but I just had to say it. Secretary of State Antony Blinken went to Saudi Arabia and sat down with the Crown Prince in what we assume was an attempt to beg the OPEC nation to not raise oil prices. This meeting is pretty significant because the rhetoric against Saudi Arabia from the Biden administration has been pretty harsh. With us now is Scott Horton. He is the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of Antiwar.com, and host of Antiwar Radio on Pacifica 90.7 FM KPFK. Scott, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Okay, let's talk about the significance of Blinken going and sitting there in Saudi Arabia with the Crown Prince, looking like he's begging a little bit. What did you make of this meeting?
Well, I'm afraid that he's there to beg him to not stop the war in Yemen. This is the greatest news of the last year, was that they had a real ceasefire there. The Houthis proved, I guess, one too many times that they could reach out and touch Saudi oil refineries and set them ablaze last year. And so somebody pulled rank on the Crown Prince and told him there's too much money at stake here. We have to make peace. So we've had an official ceasefire that only was for 4 months that is now more than a year old. And instead of the Americans over there trying to get the Saudis and the Houthis to finally iron out a final deal and make peace, the Americans are over there trying to prevent it. And it's just the most cynical thing. I mean, you try to keep a list of horrible things about Joe Biden. I mean, this policy is just absolutely unbelievable that he's essentially trying to keep the war going or prevent a final peace deal from being reached. Of course, the headlines are about he's trying to get the Saudis to make a peace deal with Israel along the lines of Trump's Abraham Accords. And so what this really means is, it's so funny. People say these are peace treaties, but you're talking about Morocco and Sudan and UAE. These are countries who've never been at war with Israel. So they're not making a peace to end a war of any kind. What they're doing is they're officially normalizing relations and selling out the Palestinians, because the promise always was that they would never completely normalize relations with Israel until the Palestinians were either given independence or freedom. And they've now been given neither. And just Jared Kushner bribed these countries with American tax dollars and weapons, jet fighters and things like that, to get them to give in. And the Saudis so far are not going that far. And of course, the ulterior motive probably is to try to get in between Saudi Arabia and Iran, because China, of course, brokered that new peace deal between the two. And it's in the American interest to keep that sectarian war going as long as they can.
Yeah, and that's an important point to bring up, because interestingly, Antony Blinken's visit to Saudi Arabia comes on the heels of really the day before, I believe, the Iranian embassy opened up in Saudi Arabia. So they opened an embassy. Also, Venezuela's Maduro was there meeting with the Saudi Crown Prince as well, and talking about potentially joining BRICS. We've got a lot of different, there's a lot of chatter there when it comes to Saudi Arabia. It looks like they're starting to turn away from the United States. We've had this deal for a really long time with the Saudis about, oil for security, the petrodollar for security. And now it looks like the Saudis are shifting, they're pivoting, they're kind of shrugging off the Americans and doing all of these things that maybe the U.S. finds to be very aggravating and threatening. And so Blinken shows up. Do you think that the Saudis are falling for it? I was watching CNN, which I sometimes do, just to see what do they have to say. And interestingly about this meeting, they said, well, what this does for the Saudis is this gives them credibility on the world stage for an American to go and visit them and sit down with them. What do you make of that?
Well, these CNN people know absolutely nothing about history before this morning when they put their makeup on, So, that goes for the men, too. That wasn't a sexist jibe just against anchors and their hairdos. They're not interested in what's really going on. They don't know the history of America's relationship with Saudi Arabia at all. And of course, they are in a powerful position because they're sitting on a hell of a lot of oil. But honestly, and this really should be the attitude, not just of libertarians like myself, but of everyone in America, left, right, and black and white, and West Coast and East and flyover, and everyone. Who needs them? America doesn't import oil from Saudi Arabia. The only reason America cares about Saudi oil is so that we can cut off the Chinese in case we ever get in a war with them, or so we can lord it over our friends and allies like the Australians, Japanese, and Koreans. That you guys want to stay our friends and not ever make us mad because we can cut off your oil. But guess what? America rules the 7 seas anyway. We don't need a single soldier on a single base in the Middle East. We don't need to prop up a single dictator there. We don't need to do anything, even assuming the goals of being able to cut off our friends and enemies from Middle East oil if it comes down to it. So, and that's just for the sake of argument, but it's just to say that we don't need a Middle Eastern empire at all. And you know, the Israelis are constantly selling our secrets to the Chinese anyway. I say to, Xi, if you're listening, you can have them. We don't need them anymore. Maybe never did.
Now you sound like Donald Trump. If Russia's listening.
Israel. Who knows that?
Okay, but here's the thing. So I totally agree with you. We don't need the Middle Eastern. We don't need Middle East oil. But what we have seemed to need is the petrodollar. We've needed the dollar to remain the world's currency, and the way that we've been able to secure that is through all oil deals had to be bought, traded in U.S. dollars. That's obviously shifting.
Yeah, let's go back to the gold standard, and then we don't have to do that. We shouldn't be an empire.
That's my question for you. Yeah, I mean, how do we combat that? Now you have Saudi Arabia saying that they're going to be accepting the Chinese currency for trading oil. They're now, Saudi Arabia's in talks to join China's based BRICS Bank. So there is going to be this shift where oil is no longer going to be traded exclusively in dollars. I'm sure dollars are going to be one of the, a main currency, but probably the Chinese yuan is also going to be a main currency. And if that's the case, what does that do to the dollar? So it seems like the powers that be here in the United States are trying to protect the dollar's dominance. What do you think is the solution to that? Because that would tank a lot of retirement funds. That would cause a lot of inflation. I mean, there would be some real devastating economic effects to that. So what do you think we should do?
Well, we got the worst of all worlds now. What we need to do is just completely abandon militarism in the empire, and we save $1 cool trillion a year right there, plus all the opportunity cost. And think about how many engineers and scientists and mathematicians and the very brightest minds spend their entire careers wasted designing weapons in the bowels of the Pentagon, that oftentimes don't ever even get used. And think of all the manpower that is just absolutely wasted on militarism. All that is profit, just sitting there waiting to, be developed. And so, if we really want to strengthen America, we abandon the empire and, reinstate the Constitution as best we can, meaning repeal the 21st century and get to work on repealing the 20th century as far as all the government intervention in the economy, and let the American people make money, and we'll be such a rich and powerful country, no one will ever think of threatening us, which they already don't. And, this whole problem with China right now, they call it the Thucydides trap. And I guess this counts for Russia, too, because they've made, some money in the past 20 years under, increased energy prices from America's terror wars and so forth. So they're kind of rising relative to their strength in, say, the late 90s or something. And it's the Thucydides trap says, well, when one major power is waning and another one is rising, then they have to fight. Yeah, but that's only if they're stupid, right? And only if the waning power doesn't snap out of it and realize, especially when you're talking about the middle part of North America, way over here in the New World, that just doesn't make any sense for us to be the global hegemon at all. A year ago in the war, in this latest stage in the war, I should say, in eastern Ukraine broke out. Robert Kagan himself wrote an article in the Washington Post, or was it the Atlantic? I think it was in the Post, where he said, you know what? Maybe we should just recognize that we live in a world where Russia is going to have more influence in Eastern Europe and China is going to have more influence in Asia, and we're just going to have to get used to that. Does that really sound crazy? And look at the map of the world. We're way over here. And they're way over there. So if even Robert Kagan can have a fit of sobriety and recognize the limits of American power, then we should all just be able to completely snap out of it. And then, so I wouldn't worry too much about those retirement funds and all that. We just need a free market capitalist economy and we'll be perfectly fine here.
I just don't know if and I see your point, but I just don't know if they're going to stop drinking at the bar of imperialist, warmongering military-industrial complex. They seem to be really drunk on that stuff. And so actually I want to pivot here to China a little bit as we're talking about them. This came out in the Wall Street Journal today. Cuba to host secret Chinese spy base focusing on U.S. This also comes after, of course, accusing China of having spy balloons that have been floating above our skies. So there's definitely a shift, a pivot towards aiming at China, picking a fight with China, essentially marching ourselves into a Cold War with China. What do you think about this secret spy base that might be in Cuba, the secret Chinese spy base?
Well, Warren Strobel is not the worst reporter, but I also like Idris Ali over at Reuters. And at least he did great stuff on Afghanistan a few years back. And he debunked it and said the Pentagon says it's not even true. I don't know if the Chinese really are so courageous as to try something like that right now. They shouldn't do that.
But why would they need to? Why do you need to have a spy base on Cuba? I mean, is this the 1950s?
Well, if they're doing it, it's simply to make a point, right? That, we're constantly off of their coast. We have troops, openly, declared troops in Taiwan, selling them weapons constantly, trying to make allies in West Papua and, forbidding the Solomon Islands from cooperating with China and doing everything we can and loudly announcing our policy to hem in and control China. And so for them to do something like that is, I think, probably nothing but a public relations stunt, essentially. That, how do you like it when we're 90 miles off of your coast? You know what I mean?
Well, it's a good point.
But I don't think that they're, being that reckless and trying to really pick a fight with the United States. I would wait for further confirmation on that. But it really does go to show how reckless our Taiwan policy is. And, back to your statement about the CNN anchors and how they just really don't even know what they're talking about. Well, 50 years ago, Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger went over there and made a deal with Mao Zedong. And they split China off from the Soviet Union and said, we'll split the weaker partner away from the more powerful one in the Cold War. And so they essentially came up with, what do the Chinese need here? And one of them was, they need recognition that Taiwan belongs to them. Formosa belongs to them. America had been pretending for more than 20 years, 25 years, that somehow Taiwan was the real government of all of China, even though they did not rule it at all. And they held a seat on the UN Security Council and the rest. So Nixon finally put an end to that. So here we are getting into a new Cold War, which risks a hot war. It's funny, you can read in the Washington Post, they'll say, this risks a new Cold War. Well, it risks an actual war is what it risks, and we're doing this to take back this position that Nixon took then, which was perfectly reasonable. I mean, it's not a perfect analogy, but this is like, the Chinese coming and saying they recognize the sovereignty and independence of Catalina Island off the coast of California, and that they will protect its sovereignty with fire. And they're going to sell weapons to the regime they support on Catalina Island. What would Uncle Sam do about that? There would be a war. We wouldn't tolerate that at all. And when they made this policy that says, look, China, we recognize that it's one country, but we want you to be reunited peacefully someday. Well, the U.S. government was 100 times more powerful than the Chinese government at that time. But times have changed. The Americans encouraged them to abandon communism for capitalism. They now have a massive GDP, and they can afford to build a navy. They can afford to build a force that could be used to take back Taiwan. And they constantly say, look, we're not going to do that unless Taiwan declares independence. Don't try your luck, right? So America should essentially be trying their best. If, again, we're talking about Joe Biden and his predecessors here, they don't operate in good faith at all. But if they were operating in good faith, they'd be operating to try to host the negotiation to go ahead and reintegrate Taiwan with China peacefully now, so that it doesn't come to a fight later. It's just like they say, it's terrible blackmail for Russia to have this gas pipeline to Germany because it means that they can use their influence to try to keep Germany out of war. Yeah, but that's what we want. War is the worst outcome of all. We want as many peace pipelines going east and west and north and south as we possibly can, from Iran through Pakistan and into India and wherever you got them, so that there's too much money at stake so that people won't fight. And so it's just absolutely sinful the way America tries to intervene in every place where people could be getting along,
I agree with you. I would love to see that sort of outcome, but I think that you and I are now drinking at the bar. We're drinking at a different bar right now. We're getting drunk on, imaginary fairy tales that our government is suddenly going to stop being warmongers.
But you know what, Kim? So this is back to your question about the currency. Is, as Ron Paul always said, they're never going to listen to me. We can keep telling the truth and doing our best. But what's going to happen is the dollar is going to fail. And there will be enough countries who decide to do exactly as you were describing before, doing everything they can to get out of the American-dominated system in a way where the demand for our currency falls around the world. And then we have what the Austrians call a crack-up boom, where it's essentially a final panic as everyone flees the dollar. And then we'll get what's coming to us. And that is how the empire probably will end. That's how empires end.
That is how empires end. I do want to finish up with this one piece from Antiwar.com. Republican senators introduce End Endless Wars Act to repeal the 2001 AUMF. Tell us about this.
Yeah, isn't that incredible? So it's Ron Paul, of course, leading the pack there, but he's got Mike Lee from Utah, who's a fairly reliable anti-war conservative, and J.D. Vance is part of the crew. And I'm sorry, there were a few more. I don't remember them all. But this is a great group of Republicans leading it, which is the most important thing of all. I know that the Democratic Party is very much the war party, but I'm still of the belief that average liberals and progressives and leftists out in America just do not support militarism. Only their leadership does. The most important thing is that support for war is undermined on the right, and having good conservative Republican leaders lead the way and be out front on ending the AUMF for the unlimited terror wars, the endless generation-long terror wars in the Middle East is, absolutely sets the right precedent, and I hope it leads to a real fight.
Yeah. Well, I hope this goes through, or at least puts on the record those who are like, nope, I want to keep the keep the wars going. It'd be nice to see who is for what if they put this sort of legislation up there for the vote. So we'll see how far this goes, but. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. Really always a pleasure talking to you. You're so informative. People can find Scott he's the director of the Libertarian Institute. He's also the editorial director of Antiwar.com, which is a great news source. And you can also hear him on his radio show, Antiwar Radio on Pacifica, 90.7 FM KPFK. Scott, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me, Kim.
Guys, I got to tell you about Field of Greens. I absolutely love this stuff. It is a fine powder made from dehydrated whole fruits and vegetables that are carefully selected to give you the most nutrients in your diet possible. All you have to do is you just take a scoop of this powder, you mix it into your iced tea or your water, and it tastes really good. It's liquidy, it's not thick, it's more like a tea. I really like that, or a lemonade. I love the lemon lime flavor, but you can also get their energy packed version, which will give you a little boost, or you could get their mixed berry or their regular flavor. And it's just a great way to get all of those nutrients into your diet. And when you get those nutrients in, you're going to sleep better, you're going to feel healthier, you're going to have healthier skin and hair, you're going to lose weight when you're getting all those nutrients into your body, because you're not going to crave junk food. A lot of times when we're craving junk food, it's because our body's like, I want something. But if you give it what it needs, you'll actually help curb the craving. So I really love Field of Greens. You could go get it at fieldofgreens.com. And if you use the promo code Kim at checkout, you're going to get 15% off your first order. There's a lot of products there at fieldofgreens.com. Pick and choose what you want, put it in the cart, use the promo code Kim, and you're going to get 15% off your first order. Again, head to fieldofgreens.com and use that promo code Kim.